it would be relevant to think in terms of both the things which are normally expected, like war and politics and oil prices and cash flows and things like that, funds flow across the world, and think of all those things. But sometimes when you think about only these things, you miss the big change that's going to happen. And the big change is technology. So let me just cover some of these issues one by one quickly before coming to what the technology tide is going to be like. So, like for instance, there are people asking me, will the Ukraine situation lead to a war? And I addressed that question in the paper. It's totally unpredictable. What one can say for certain is that oil prices are able to be brought down to below $60 per hour, and that requires politics, then Russia will not be able to escalate this war. The oil prices are driven by speculation and not only by demand and supply. For instance, hardly 5% of the contracts of oil actually result in delivery. 95% is buy and sell on paper. And somebody makes money, somebody loses money, and that's the game. So if there is some way to control the price and bring it down, then the war might actually die. So I cannot predict whether there will be a world war or not, but it's unlikely. The other question people asking is, the world is getting into a recession in 2024, and there's enough articles being written in the press. Even today the paper talks about the world going to face a grim. Likely. It's unlikely because I suspect that the world will actually see a global increase in GDP of something between 2.7 to 3% or 2.7 to 2.9%, as opposed to what it was in 2023, which was 3%. Now, why do we feel a sense of gloom? There's a justification because it is below the threshold level which makes you happy. Now, how do you draw a threshold level? There's nothing written in stone as to this is the threshold level. But if you look at the average GDP growth rate of the globe or the world between 1961 to 2022, the average was something like 3.47%. So naturally, when your expected growth or you feel the growth is less than 3.47%, there's a likely feeling that no, things are not going right. But actually, it's 2.7 to 2.9%. It's not recession. Okay? So the optimist, on the other hand, who says, inflation is going to get wiped out this year, all problems solved. No, inflation can never get wiped out, except with negative consequences in the economy. There's a fine balance between inflation, demand, and supply. So as long as demand-supply game goes on and is not interfered with, inflation is part of the equation. So inflation is never going to get wiped out. You can control it. Even in India, the Reserve Bank of India's mandate is to try and see that inflation is between 4% to 6%. That's the range it wants it to be. In a growing economy, you need that kind of inflation. Because you're going to try and push for supply. On the other hand, in a much more stable, large economy, a matured economy, you don't want that kind of inflation. You probably want it to be 2%. You don't want it to be like minus, like Japan. And Japan has had 3 decades of horrible minus. So inflation is not always a bad thing, but having minus or deflation is bad. The other question is, will interest rates drop in 2024? Yeah, it comes from the same place where they say inflation is going to be totally controlled, therefore interest rates are going to drop. It's quite likely that in the second half of 2024, interest rates will moderate, will drop, provided inflation doesn't rise again due to some other external shock. So if there's no external shock, inflation is likely to slip further down to levels which are manageable, and interest rates will be dropped because the government wants to see growth. They're not happy at 2.7 to 2.9%. We're very happy to have 3.5% growth. So interest rates, people are pushing for getting the interest rates to be dropped. It will happen when inflation is under control, and that might be in the second half of 2024. The other question is, in the context of that, how will the Indian economy perform? I'll discuss it later because it requires a fair amount of explanation. But I'd like to just say that the last 5 quarters the Purchasing Managers Index, which is an indication of how much people on the ground are seeing or expecting growth, that seems to suggest that Indian economy will do well, and it will be among the fastest growing large economies. But I'd like you to realize it's the fastest growing large economy. At least my analysis shows that in 2024, there will be 19 small economies which will grow faster than India. So we're not the fastest growing economy, but we're the fastest growing large economy. I think with just this background, I'd like to move on to one more important thing. That's the importance of technology, and more importantly, of that subset called AI, artificial intelligence.
Segueing into technology now.
Yes,
can
segue
you
into
help us
technology. Exactly. Just segue into technology. It gives me an opportunity to talk about the most important thing that's happening. But let me ask you. Ask the audience a question. Do you think about 2008? What is 2008? What do you remember 2008 for? Most people will tell the global credit crisis. But what you forget is that it also happened to be when we as humans start getting hooked onto smartphones. BlackBerry started a few years earlier, but it was a business phone with limited users. It came out much earlier than 2008. But the real consumer device became with a lot of people only around 2008. And the rest is history. That's the first time the office girls got hooked. That's other members of the family got hooked. Then they got cheaper and youngsters got them too. Then data costs spiraled down. And everybody you see on the street, including the street vendor, started using smartphones. So 2008 was a watershed moment when suddenly we became less social, more device-oriented. And today it's not unusual to see a family of four sitting together at dinner, or even just for a chat around the sofa set, and everyone's on their smartphones instead of talking to each other. Now when AI is going to come, or is coming, the smartphone is going to get way smarter. Way smarter. I don't think it should be even called a smartphone. It'll become a smart device where you can do all kinds of things. So it'll rejig our lives. The impact will be far more than the current software that drives some smartphones. And that day is not too far away. And the big day is not just that. The singularity moment is the big day.